Okay, and welcome back. Hour number 3. Glad you are along. And I had an email this morning from a friend in New Jersey, and he said there were large, fat snowflakes falling on the first day of April in New Jersey. So global warming continues to exact a terrible toll on most of the planet. And if you're in the upper Northwest or even on the West Coast, you've had an awful lot of precipitation, whether it be in the form of rain or snow this year. And to talk with us about the latest laugher about global warming, and that being the incredible winter we've had, is Robert Felix. And he is, of course, available by going to his name at rense.com and just clicking on that and go right to his extraordinarily informative website, which has a lot of information you'll find nowhere else. And Robert, of course, first came on the scene with his book Ice Age Now. I guess it was in the mid-90s. It's been quite a while, Robert. How long ago was that?
Oh, it has, Jeff. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, sure.
The second edition came out in 2005.
Wow.
And you know, as things progress, it begins to look more and more like that's where we're headed, is into an ice age.
Yeah, at least a mini ice age. We should qualify that, and we will in a few minutes. All
Sure.
told, there's talk about they've been begging for years, Californians, for a snowpack in the Sierras. So what's the basic overall look at the Sierra Nevada in terms of snowpack as opposed to average annuals? Do you have any stats on that?
Governor Brown just announced this week that snowpack is 165% of normal. So that's a big chunk. And then, of course, Mount Shasta is a place where I think it's really interesting, because Mount Shasta, like so many places in California, Mount Shasta has had record snowfall this winter. But I expect that to make the glaciers continue to grow on Mount Shasta. And notice that I said continue to grow, because the glaciers on Mount Shasta have been growing for at least 50 years.
Huh.
And very few people seem to hear about that. I think the media has done a great job of covering that up.
Yeah, they have. Yeah.
They have. All 7 glaciers on Mount Shasta are growing. And 2 of them have actually doubled in size since 1951.
Wow.
But now with record snow again this year, I expect those glaciers just to keep on growing.
Well, that's what happens. You've made the point in the past for many years, and your first book was Not by Fire but by Ice, that how these things begin, it's not like there's a big freeze and everything just stops. It's that there's an extraordinary snowfall and ice accumulation over the winter. Temperatures stay lower longer, and there's not the melt-off in the spring. And so there's the bed line, so to speak, the baseline, the bedrock of snow and ice keeps building every year, a little bit more, and then pretty soon it becomes a mass unto itself over such a wide area that it does, I think, influence the climate just by virtue of the fact there's so much frozen material there.
Exactly, and that's one of the points that I should probably make more often, is that an ice age doesn't mean that it's going to be all that much colder. It's cold enough right now to have an ice age.
Is it really?
It's cold. Yeah, all we need is more moisture in the winter.
Uh-huh.
And now we're beginning to get it, because when you think about it, I mean, I was doing an interview one time in Winnipeg, and they said, "What do you mean it's cold enough right now?" And I said, "Well, in Winnipeg, let's say in January, let's say that you get 2 feet of snow every day for 30 days. All of a sudden, you've got 60 feet of snow, and it's no colder." So that's how it happens. Is just more and more snow in the wintertime. So, well, as an example, during the last ice age, all of Canada was covered by about 2 miles of ice, and that ice extended as far down into the United States, as far down as the Missouri River. And there was a cliff of ice on the north side of the Missouri River, about 15 stories tall. But on the south side of the Missouri River, people could have lived there. It was warm enough.
Amazing.
And people wonder.
That's almost like drawing a line, and one side is okay and one side is not.
It was. I don't quite know why the line was there, but it was. But yeah, I do have a map on my website that does show where the extent of the glaciation during the last ice age. It's if anybody goes onto my website, iceagenow.com, and just scroll down a little bit on the right-hand side, there's a link there. It's a map. It's an ice age map, and just click on that, and you can see exactly how far south the ice came during the last ice age.
I'm looking at it right now. That's a fascinating map. Yeah.
And that's well, it's interesting. For instance, is that Seattle was covered with 0.4 of a mile of ice straight up, and yet Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, was not covered. So
0.4, almost a half a mile of ice?
Or more than a half. I'm sorry, did I say 0.4? I meant 4,000 feet. So that's 0.8 of a mile.
Gee.
Yeah.
And this is how long ago?
This was just that was the full extent of the ice age would have been about 15,000 years ago. But now the amazing thing is that although Seattle was covered with ice, without much ice, it only extended south about as far as Olympia, Washington. And if you got 150 miles south of Olympia, temperatures were only about 7 degrees colder than they are right now.
That's quite tolerable, really. That's a jacket. That's all.
Yeah, I want people to know that they can survive an ice age. It's just, I think the big problem with, not if you're living in Canada, then I'd be kind of worried. But for some reason, most of Alaska was not covered by ice. It was amazing. And then although Canada was covered by almost 2 miles of ice, the Arctic Ocean, and this has mystified scientists for a while, but the Arctic Ocean had about the same amount of ice as it does today. And of course, that's where I come in is that I think the reason for that is because of all of the underwater volcanoes in the Arctic Ocean.
That makes sense.
Kept it. Yeah, they would have kept it from freezing.
Yeah. Well, looking at that map of the last ice age, and 15,000 years ago was yesterday in terms of our planet. I mean, that's just when you look at it in the proper perspective, things have happened so quickly. I mean, they really do happen fast. And I look at this, and if you look at it, just go to iceagenow.com, and on the right-hand side is a map. It says Ice Age Maps, and you can see right where that line is. Below the line, no problem. And that's virtually, I'd say, 85%, 80% of the formerly United States.
Well, one of the things I mentioned in the book is essentially the climate of Chicago moves to Atlanta. And I think this last winter, probably a few people in Atlanta would think that's already started.
You have always updating on your site the issue of climate. We've got snow in the Sierra. Now, one thing I think I should mention here, just by way of simple facts are facts, is that we are getting radioactive isotopes from the crisis in Japan. We are not being told what those isotopes are, except in the case of iodine-131, which has been found now, admittedly, in 2 states, Washington and California, in milk. Now, that doesn't mean it hasn't been found in other states, because the federal government here, unfortunately, has a little problem with lying. And the story I read made it sound like they only tested in 2 locations and found them in 2 locations, that being positive samples. So what that means for the snowpack, I'm not sure. But keep in mind that radioactive iodine-131 has a half-life of about 7-10 days. It's gone in 3 weeks, basically. So it's not a problem. But cesium, 30 years. Plutonium, we're in trouble. So would this snowpack potentially have a frosting on top that would in the old cliche, glow at night. I mean, this is a potential that the runoff may not be as good as we'd like it to be, depending upon what kind of isotopes are sitting up on this snowpack. Is that accurate?
Oh my gosh, I haven't really studied the radioactivity coming from Japan because I really don't believe most of the information I'm getting. I have no idea what's true and what's not true.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough call.
I don't know.
It is.
I do know that at the ends of ice ages and the beginnings of ice ages, that they usually find radioactive beryllium and quite a few other radioactive materials. So I would imagine some of this will be sitting in the Greenland ice sheet for thousands of years.
Depending on what kind of radioactivity it is. If it is plutonium, it'll be here for 25 to 50,000 years. So that's not a short haul. Back in just a minute with Robert Felix, the man who long ago predicted what we're in right now. And we'll continue after this. Okay, back with you folks and Robert Felix. IceAgeNow.com is his website. Now, the next storm, as I look at the Pacific, Northeast Pacific satellite image, it's a large one and it's coming in here. If there is any fallout in the storm, any radioactivity, it will certainly come down as precipitation on the water and on the land. As it backs up and piles up against the mountains and kind of gets wrung out like a sponge, you're going to get a lot of that. Depends on what elevation, too. So we are, sadly, as Robert said, and he's expressing the feelings of many Americans, not getting a straight shot of information from the government. No surprise there. And many people online are unfortunately not really qualified to make the projections they're making. And hopefully you'll keep that in mind when you hear doom and gloomers. We don't know. We just don't know because we're not being told. Now, does that mean we necessarily have to assume the worst? No. It means that we have to do more research as much as we can. There are citizen scientists and citizens doing readings, and they're making those readings available online. They're often putting up the counts per minute, which again doesn't tell you which isotope it is. It doesn't tell you what the original normal background radiation is for that particular area, so we don't know. We do know there has been an increase, very slight, measured all around the world in the northern hemisphere. But beyond that, it's a tough call. And the tragedy of the whole thing is that this is not going to end anytime soon from all that I can determine, and you folks, I'm sure, would agree with that. So we have another major storm coming toward the west coast, which should be here, looks like, in about 12 hours or 12 to 16, 18 hours at the most. Anyway, that's the story. So when is this winter going to end? I know it rained in the Northwest up until most of the middle of June last year.
Well, yeah, it's, I don't know. I look at what's happening you mentioned the Sierras, and yeah, there's areas in the Sierras that have 60 feet of snow. That's 5 stories of snow.
Yeah.
And it's still coming. It's incredible. I have one chapter in my book called 9 Stories of Snow, where people were laughing at me when I wrote that, but they're not laughing quite as loudly now.
No.
It's a possibility. But 60 feet of snow, I mean, if you got a 5-story house, it's still not tall enough to be up out of the snow. It's just incredible.
Well, you've watched the work of Piers Corbin, I'm sure.
I was lucky enough, believe it or not, Jeff. 2 years ago, I was in London, and I was lucky enough to have dinner with him.
Wow, he's amazing. You're the Piers Corbin, and you've been doing this for over 15 years now.
Except my hair is a lot shorter than his is.
Yeah, he
No,
must be a joy to have a conversation with. That guy.
oh, he is absolutely amazing. I was lucky enough. My wife and I got to meet him and his wife, and another solar physicist from Russia that happened to be there, and it was just the most incredible evening to hear.
Yeah, I'll bet.
And for those who don't know, Pierce Corbin is an astrophysicist.
Yeah.
Who absolutely says that all of this stuff is created by the sun. You know, the weather, whatever we've got, the climate. And he also has warned that we should be aware that there could be massive earthquakes, probably will be in the next 2 years, and massive tsunamis. Again, just because of the action of the sun. Mm-hmm. And of course, I said the same thing in Not by Fire but by Ice. I have warned people to expect ever bigger earthquakes and ever bigger tsunami, because that's what happens as we enter ice ages. The other thing, of course, is that we have extremes. In fact, I just put a new link on the website today. But there's a top paleoclimatologist, George Kukla.
Yeah, I see the link. Yeah.
Well, I was lucky enough. I met George in May. I was back in Chicago at there was a climate convention that was sponsored by the Heartland Institute, and I was one of the co-sponsors. And I was lucky enough to meet Mr. Kukla, and I actually quoted him in the book too. But he has just come down strongly, saying that people should prepare for a new ice age, which, because of what I say, of course, why I like hearing that.
That's comforting, I guess. Yeah.
Well, I shouldn't say comfort. Well, it's comforting to me in
professionally,
the idea of
sure.
Professionally, yes, professionally, but not for everyday life. I do live in the Northwest, and I do have a supply of food further south, because I think it is absolutely critical. I do not sell food on my website. Let me be clear about that. But I think it's absolutely critical that people do have a supply of food.
So you've got a place to go that's further south, without naming communities necessarily. How much, in round numbers, are we talking about? 200, 300, 400 miles, 500 miles south? 200
would be enough.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah. And so, I get emails from people in Oregon. Where should I move south? And I tell them, you're already in a good place.
No, don't move. Oregon is it. As long as you're not near a nuclear facility or a military target, you're fine, and you don't want to be downwind. I've been watching the National Radiation Map, as reliable as it probably isn't, but a lot of these higher CPMs, 58, 68, 70, are right near nuclear power plants. And if you ask anyone in the industry, most of them will be honest enough to tell you that virtually every plant releases what amounts to as dangerous radioactivity routinely in small amounts, and they say too little to worry about. Well, that's not true, because a lot of it is cumulative, and how much is too much? How many exposures does it take to bring you to a threshold of real crisis? It's a dice roll. Hold on, if you would, Robert. We'll have to pause. Be right back. Okay, and let's get right back to Robert Felix. Okay, Robert, as far as the global warming crew goes, and never mind the probably 40,000 scientists by now who have directly and overtly opposed this whole absurd hoax, Where are they? Are they still trying? Are they trying to excuse the winter by being a result in some fashion or another of warming? Is that their latest scam?
Oh yes, they're saying that cold weather is caused by global warming. It's incredible what they're saying, and people believe it. That's the scary part.
Oh, it does. It scares the heck out of me. I know.
Yeah, and you know the cap and trade law just kind of disappeared last year. They weren't able to pass that law, and yet the Environmental Protection Agency is starting to write more and more of their little rules, and they're just putting it into effect anyway. In energy,
the whole carbon thing is another way to enslave the planet. Is what they're trying to do.
And the thing is that it's so amazing to me is that CO2 does not drive the climate. You talk to any climatologist, and you find out that CO2 rises after the temperatures have already risen, not before. It's the cart before the horse type of thing. Mm-hmm. The ocean is a CO2 sink. When the ocean gets colder, it absorbs CO2. When the ocean gets warmer, it releases CO2. So I agree that the oceans did warm for a while. I think it was caused by underwater volcanoes because the heat began at 2 miles down.
Uh-huh. Well, there you go. Sure, volcanism.
No way.
Yeah, no.
How can humans heat the water 2 miles down before they hit the surface? It's impossible. It's absolutely physically impossible.
Volcanism is not known by most people. It is incredibly extensive. I don't know how many volcanoes there are in the world. There are more than the average person could even guess. It's just...
Yes. Well, when I started writing the first book back in 1991, and at that time, scientists thought there were about 10,000 underwater volcanoes in the entire world. And they said that underwater volcanic activity was 80%, that 80% of all volcanic activity occurred underwater. So that would tell me that they must think there's 2,000 above water volcanoes and 8,000 below water, or something like that. Well, that was 1991. Then in 1993, they discovered another 1,100 underwater volcanoes off the coast of Easter Island. So
1,100? Wow.
1,133, and in an area about the size of New York State, which in relation to the ocean, that's tiny area.
Now, are these just in some cases vents? Are they actually individual little volcanic-looking mountain or lava formations?
Well, a lot of them are rift volcanoes, and for an example of that, also in 1993, they discovered coaxial volcano, which is a rift volcano off the coast of Astoria, Oregon. And this coaxial volcano, it's 4 miles long, but it's not like Mount St. Helens. It's not one of those cones that sticks up in the air or something, or sticks up underwater. All it is a 4 mile crack in the ocean floor, and then lava just starts pouring up out of it. And this lava is 2,150 degrees hot. It's 10 times the boiling point. So they discovered that 4 mile long volcano off the coast off of Astoria, Oregon. Then a few months later, they discovered a 6 mile long underwater volcano off the coast off of Newport, Oregon. Well, now going back there, 1991, scientists thought there were 10,000 underwater volcanoes. Now, NASA believes there may be as many as 3 million underwater volcanoes. It's incredible. We know more about the moon, literally, than we know about underwater volcanoes.
That's amazing. We're floating on volcanic magma is what we're doing. The whole damn surface.
I've got another article that I have to put on the website as soon as I have time, hopefully next week. But There's an article just came out this week in Science Daily that they're talking about underwater volcanoes, and they're still using that figure of 80% of all underwater, of all volcanoes occur underwater. That is so far wrong. And yet some scientists are still using that figure. It's amazing.
Science is tragically deficient in so many areas, and because someone says he or she is a scientist, people trust them. I mean, it's sad. They're grant-driven and grant-owned, and often egomaniacs, to put it mildly. They live in this little tiny world of academia, and there are some great ones, but many of them are in the system and they're worthless. And most of them whore themselves out to the government to do research and defense project, scientific projects and experiments and weapon system development, and they don't want to talk about that. It's all true.
And you know, when you use the word whore themselves out, I guess you can make the figures come out the way you want them, and
they do that all the time.
So it depends on which political force is in charge at the time as to what they're coming up with.
108. Go ahead.
Well, I guess in order to survive, that's what they have to do.
Well, exactly. They want the money. They want the grants. They produce the results expected, and it's just real simple. They do this in virology. They do this in pharmaceutical research. We know about the CDC. We know about aspartame, and God only knows how many other examples there are. 108 active volcanoes in Japan, not all erupting at the same time, of course. And this is a land count. This is not underneath. Japan sits on the archipelago of Japan, 6,800 islands altogether. 4 islands comprise 93% of the actual landmass of Japan, 4 of the 6,800. But there are 4 tectonic plates that literally merge under this country of Japan, and constantly the dynamics, the force is enormous. And then the subductions, and then under that, of course, is all this volcanic activity and stress, and it's no wonder they have great earthquakes there. It's not a surprise. We've had certainly a great earthquake. I asked the people in Christchurch, New Zealand. That was great enough for them. The people in Chile had one. We are overdue on the northwest coast for one. We'll see what happens. It could be now. It could be in 10 years. We don't know.
You were talking about Christchurch.
Yeah.
And the most amazing thing to me is shortly after that big earthquake, I had somebody email me and say that they thought that could be a harbinger of a new volcanic eruption in Christchurch. And at first I laughed at that. I thought, that's pushing it a little bit, but no.
It's sitting on a bad scene.
Oh, I started looking into it, and there are 2 dormant volcanoes sitting right outside of Christchurch. And Christchurch has had, I haven't checked in probably a couple of weeks, but the last time I checked, they have had more than 5,000
aftershocks.
Earthquakes. Well, I don't know if they're earthquakes or aftershocks.
It's hard to know.
Or are they precursors?
Yeah, it could be all of the above. I don't know either. Hold on, Robert. We'll be right back.
Bet.
Okay, back with Robert Felix. IceAgeNow.com is his website, and lots of fascinating things there all the time. He updates it regularly. What are we looking at then in terms of summertime? Hot, short, and then back into cold? What do you see? What are your sense?
Well,
what do you sense?
Guess that's going to depend, I guess, on whether we have much volcanic activity. Before we go there, I just also wanted to mention, just for people's knowledge here, is that not only are the glaciers on Mount Shasta growing, Mount Shasta in California.
They're growing all over the world, too, aren't they?
Glaciers are growing in Washington State. The Nisqually Glacier on Mount Rainier is growing. Glaciers on Glacier Peak in northern Washington are growing. And Crater Glacier, for people who remember when Mount St. Helens erupted, there was Mount St. Helens was covered with glaciers, and those glaciers melted, and they ran down the Toutle River with mud and trees and bulldozers and animals and everything running down the river. Well, Crater Glacier is now bigger than it was before the 1980 eruption. That just for people who wonder about that. In Alaska, glaciers are growing in Alaska for the first time in 250 years. In Icy Bay, Alaska, there's 3 glaciers that have advanced a third of a mile in a year. And then there's the Juneau ice field, which people don't understand how big that is, but the Juneau ice field, which is just behind Juneau, Alaska, and leading into Canada, it has 1,500 square miles. It's huge. It's the 5th largest ice field in the entire Western Hemisphere, and it is growing. So just so that people know, because every time I read an article about some glacier that's growing, the article will say, this is the only glacier that's growing. It's such an anomaly. Well, that's not true. That's not true. There's a lot of them around the world that are growing. But anyway, as to this year, I don't know. It would depend on volcanic activity. I look at all of the volcanic activity that's going on around the world. And, I'm hoping that we don't see one of those years without a summer like they had in 1816 after a huge volcanic eruption. So I guess watch the volcanoes.
Right. What's really sad in a way, and I'm no different than anyone else who sees something that's worth pursuing. I had Nick Begich on about 15 years ago, and I think we're the first or very close to it to talk about HAARP and the potential for what HAARP can do in Nick's estimation. We don't really know. There's speculation has become fact on the internet now. Every damned earthquake and every major aberrant Mother Nature weather occurrence now is HAARP. Right away, it's HAARP. HAARP did it. The New World Order did it. HAARP did Japan. HAARP did Christchurch. HAARP did... We've got to get away from this stuff. Now, that's not to say... Go ahead, Robert.
Well, I don't pay attention to HAARP, but go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that the ghouls who are in charge of most of the planet are very quick to parasitize and do whatever they can to take advantage of tragedies. That's just the way they work. So that's a given. But cause them? People need to withhold judgment on this. Read the stuff, fine. Don't rush to embrace what really is a conspiracy theory. There's not one nanospeck of hard science to prove that HAARP has ever caused a single earthquake. There is a Mount Everest of speculation. There's no proof. That's a fact. If there's any hard scientific evidence that HAARP has actually been used and triggered a major earthquake, I'd like to see it. And I can just put that out there as a caveat. Ask for the science. These people who quote sources that remain unnamed. I can't reveal the name of my sources. Somebody in the Pentagon told me this. A high insider in the CIA told me this. A high insider in the MI5, MI6. They never name names. Now, understandable that they wouldn't, but that makes it awfully easy for anybody to claim anything and hide behind this shroud of I can't identify my sources. So
I love hearing you say that. Because when I do radio interviews, I get so many phone calls that people want to talk about HAARP, and they act so sure that it has caused all this stuff. And I just stick to the thing that I think that we're being arrogant. We as humans are being arrogant to think that we can control the weather, or we can cause earthquakes, or we can do any of those things. I mean, all you have to do, I've been to visit Mount St. Helens, which was a very small earthquake or a very small volcano in the scheme of things. And when I look at the amount of devastation that one volcano did, I just wonder how in the world can we begin to think that we could even approximate that. I mean, do we know how much energy it takes just to lift an elevator up to the 100th floor, of a building? And we think that we can do this other stuff. There's not enough energy in the world to do that.
It must be grueling for you to hear phone calls from otherwise very kind and intelligent people who buy into this stuff.
Yes.
No science, no proof, and it's become a whole subculture. HARP or scalar weapons or underground earthquake advanced machines that are science. Please show me one shred of proof. There aren't even any patents. Now, everything is patented. There are no patents that I've ever heard of. And I've studied Eastland's patents about what HARP can do with electromagnetic energy and high altitudes and potentially scrambling the guidance systems of some incoming warheads. That's one of the most eclectic things. And the idea of HARP being able to influence the behavior of people by recreating frequencies that we know in the brain cause various emotional responses. That's all possible. But show me something, please, that HARP has caused an earthquake or can actually direct the jet stream. I'm not saying it can't. I'm saying show me.
Yes.
Just show me.
I agree with you totally. To me, the things that are going on with the weather, the things that are going on with the earthquakes, the things that are going on with the volcanoes, all have to do with cycles.
The sun.
And in this case, the sun, and in this case also,
the moon.
It's precession of the equinoxes.
Of the equinox and lunar perigee and syzygy all occurred on the same day, March 16th. Was it March? Anyway, right around there, March.
I think it was March
18th.
19th, maybe. But
okay,
yeah,
19th.
And that's where. And you had mentioned Piers Corbin earlier.
Yeah.
And that's where. Yes, I go with that because Piers Corbin looks at all of those things. And
he's a real scientist. He's a real scientist.
He ties it back to the sun, and he looks at the history of these things. But there's one little cycle that people aren't aware of is something called the solar retrograde cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a cycle that is caused when both Neptune and Jupiter are in the same quadrant of the solar system, which, and I'm not an astrophysicist, but according to my understanding, that only happens every 180 years. And when that happens, they tug on the sun. The sun has its own little orbit. And they tug on the sun, and the sun goes into what's called a solar retrograde, where it's outside of its normal orbit. And when that happens, temperatures on the Earth change and get cooler. And so that's what I think we're seeing right now. Well, that 180-year solar retrograde cycle, when you double that every 360 years, for some reason, it triggers, or has in the past at least, it triggers a little ice age. And so the last time that this happened was about 360 years ago. So based on that, we should be headed into a little ice age. And there are other scientists, I think there's a geologist, I'm having one of those brain things right now. I think his name is Don Easterbrook. I'll look it up during the next break, but that has published on this saying that we're headed into a colder climate for the next 30 to 60 years, which might then continue on and become an even bigger ice age cycle, but at least a little ice age.
Uh-huh.
These are stuff that show up in the geologic record, and so it's just part of a cycle.
Right.
And the earthquake activity.
If we have that many earthquakes on the planet, 1 million, even if we have 100,000, 50,000, the potential of earthquakes triggered by volcanism is also enormous. I mean, these are just a given.
Well, one of the things, when I mentioned that precession of the equinoxes cycle.
Uh-huh.
Oh, I hear some music.
It's okay. We're out of time, but go ahead and make your last point.
Well, that the island of Barbados
Mm-hmm.
was actually driven up out of the ocean in sync with that cycle. So I expect more and bigger earthquakes, bigger and bigger.
Well, so does Jim Birkeland, and you know Jim. And
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Robert, for everything you do, and it's great to talk to you again, and we'll talk again fairly soon.
Jeff, thank you for having me on.
Okay, my pleasure. Be well. All righty. Okay, and that's our program tonight. Thanks for being here. Have a wonderful weekend. Make the most of it. We'll be back with you Sunday night for the encore, and then next week, guests lining up already. We'll keep right on top of things as best we can at rents.com. So hope to see you there. Take care.